Hello, everybody. This is President Foxman, or my channel. My name is Noah, and this is my close friend Bo. We've known each other for a while. There's another video on this channel where he tells his story and kind of the way he sees life, and that was a really fun conversation. And so I'm really happy to have him back to kind of talk about some of the things that we've been talking about on this channel a lot. And I just want to say thank you for joining us, Bo.
Yeah, dude, pleasure to be here. I'm a little bit sick, so you might hear some sick noises from me, but really looking forward to having this conversation.
Yeah. Um. Well, one thing that you, I've been kind of putting back to you some of the stuff that has been around my mind for the last couple of weeks, and I'd really love to hear some of your thoughts on metamodernism for one. And so I know you mentioned that there might need to be a little bit of a refresher that has to happen. So I'll try to keep my 5 minute video, shrink it down into like 30 seconds. But the basic idea of metamodernism is what comes after postmodernity. So if tradition is all these local beliefs and very all the stories being passed down and the music of your culture, and then we move into modernity where it's very much about logic and reason and trying to intellectualize everything,
Yeah, yeah.
the Enlightenment, all this kind of stuff. And then we move out of that and we have postmodernism where we're criticizing and breaking down all the stuff that we've built up because it doesn't quite fit what we need it to. It doesn't encapture everything. And then how do we respond? What's the next step? And so that's metamodernity, and there's a few kind of philosophies around it, but for the most part, it seems to be some sort of reintegration. Like, how do we take all the pieces of the other steps and create something that's better because of it? And there's a few pieces to this, and that's the basic idea. You can see it play out in a few places. I think everything everywhere all at once. I don't know if you've seen that movie, but it's kind of pointed to as a meta modern movie. The Barbie movie is also kind of pointed to in this way. So it's kind of going through the postmodern kind of downhill deconstruction, hitting the bottom, and then trying to find out what's the next step. And that's kind of the thought process around this. And I have some theories myself, but I also know that there's a lot of criticism around this, and then also the question about how useful even is this. I was talking to Drake the other day about this, and that was his point. And I'm like, that's actually a very good point. But what does that kind of stir in you, and what do you think about when
Yeah.
you hear that?
So the first thing that popped into my head with this is I'm really glad that you did this summary because this chronology, I think the chronology of these things brought into my mind this book called The Fourth Turning. I haven't read it, but my dad has read it, and he and I have conversations about it. And what it's largely about is looking at demographics and generations and trying to identify cycles. And so you and I have had this conversation before. That there's a couple different ways that you can have a view on how things happen. One of them is random.
Mm-hmm.
You can believe that things are randomly happening and blah blah blah, and it's like there's no controlling, there's no sense in like codifying this stuff because it's just random. History is just randomly happening. So you have random, then you have linear. People who believe that this happens because of this, happens because of this, happens because of this, and that it doesn't loop back on itself. That it's just this linear progression of things, cause and effect. So you have random, linear, and then you have cyclical, which is where one thing leads to another thing, which leads back to this thing, which leads back to this thing, and then you have this kind of circular thing. And so random would be like trying to plot the path of an atom in relation to other atoms. It's like there's just random stuff happening, right? But linear would be like you're learning. So you've learned this, and now you've learned this, and now you've learned this, and this next thing, this topic needs to the next topic. And then you have cyclical, which is like the seasons. So
Mm-hmm.
like the earth rotates and this part of the world gets warmer and this one gets cooler, and then the plants change and stuff like that, and it's cyclical. And so this book talks about those main things, but kind of identifies that um, the cyclical way of looking at things answers a lot of questions, and they look at generations. And basically, they've analyzed these 4 generations and realized that there are 4 different archetypes for generations, and I don't have them off the top of my head, but it's usually this 80 to 100-year cycle that starts and ends with a great war. So World War I is an example. World War II is an example of kind of being divided by these 80-year cycles. The Civil War, the Revolutionary War. What they found is these cycles of history kind of continue to repeat themselves, and the 4 generations evenly divided between these cycles have similar archetypes, similar characteristics in terms of the culture that's dominating at that time. And I'm drawing a parallel between what you said, this establishment of rules in the modernist realm, followed by a rejection of those things, followed by we're like, let's try and find the middle ground, and then I forget what's next, but usually it's a war, or something breaks down, and the whole institution crumbles, but then it needs to be rebuilt back to like, okay, we need to find structure. It's usually find structure, critique structure, lose faith in structure, destroy structure, rebuild structure.
Mm-hmm.
And so back to Drake's question, it's like, is this even worth it? There's some of these things where it's like, man, these cycles, is it possible / is it worth it even to critique these cycles, or should we just kind of accept them as they are? It's a really interesting question, but I think it's at once foolish to say, oh, there's nothing we can do and we shouldn't even think about it. Like, that's foolish, but it's also foolish to say, yes, let's control every variable.
Yeah.
And like, yes, we can change everything. And so I think the truth lies somewhere in between, but that would be the reference I bring up is this book called The Fourth Turning, kind of observing these patterns with generations and things that happen in the world, and characteristics and archetypes that characterize each of those generations.
I think that's really good. I think there's been one move, and you can kind of see this in recent kind of major conversions of young people or large groups of young people into like the most traditional like sects of like Christianity, or even like Islam. You see this like huge movement towards trying to find tradition wherever you can find it. So you see huge moves into Catholicism, into Orthodoxy, into Islam. You'll see that a lot too, and that's one way of framing it. And I think some of the metamodernism is to try to avoid that. Find out like, well, we don't want to lose everything that we brought to this point. There's a certain level of like when you go into tradition, an option is let's just reject modernity entirely. Like let's just throw it away. But the reason, this is the thing that everybody will mention, but like the reason why we're talking right now over the computer, over the internet, and you're like hundreds of miles away, is because of modernity. Is because we did all the work of science, and we're able to find out these things to allow for this process to even happen. And it seems like it's good. Like it seems like it provides something for us. It's also a tool where it could be used for bad things as well. So you can't just say it's totally good or totally evil. But it seems like it's better that we have it than we don't. And so how do we walk this middle ground? How do we say like, okay, let's not just be blind and take away all the stuff we already have, but how do we also try to reintegrate all the pieces? How do we have something that's really solid, but also want to have the criticism. Um, it's a difficult path, and it's not super easy.
Absolutely.
But it's kind of the weird middle place, because I know when we talked about this last, about uh, these models of how the world is, the random, the linear, and the cyclical. There's an element of truth to all of it. Um, we
And
encounter the
that's
random constantly, for example.
exactly. Well, that's why I brought up those three examples, is because yeah, when you're looking at an atom move across a field of
Hmm.
atoms, it's like that's there's not a pattern to that. Obviously, it's like okay, you're bound by the laws of physics. It's like mass and gravity and vibration and those things. But where that leads you, the path is not patterned, right?
Hmm.
But then you have cyclical and it's like okay, farmers like we grow our food based on cyclical. We rely on that heavily, and so that's obviously there's some truth there. And then linear, like there's like a tree doesn't shrink down again. It grows and then dies and
Yeah.
that might be cyclical. But like you can I think you'd be a fool to just say, this is the only correct way to look at it. It's
Yeah.
like, no, it's like you gotta kind of choose, be wise about when you apply which which pattern to what. So
Well, and I
um,
think the linear model for one bit is very much in the same frame as the progressive, right? There's this idea of like we're getting better. Like there is a or we are constantly trying to move towards whatever the next best thing is. And so you see
yes,
that in the idea that, at one point we thought X was good and now we don't. And
right,
we're on this line, and we just need to find out what the next thing that we think is good that isn't good. That's like the postmodern move is like, okay, you
right,
think you got there, but no, you're missing this. And so we just have to keep doing that. And there's something that's not wrong about that, but you need a frame for it. You need to understand what good is to be able to get there.
absolutely. I'd also like to point out, just in terms of like the use of these different ways that history says itself, what you were describing, how linear progression happens, is applying repeated cyclical
Hmm.
things. You learn something, you test it, you fail. You learn something, you test it, you fail. You learn something, you test it, you fail. And that's you have to apply cyclical in order to get linear.
Hmm.
So that's one of those things where it's like, oh, and then you learn something that you didn't realize. So there's random hidden within that process. So just to call that out. But then, um, yeah, I think that what you said is true. I love tying this back to morality. It's like and an understanding of truth. It's like if there has to be things that are true, or else all of this is for naught.
Yeah.
And if you can't agree on that, there like how do you have a conversation about it? Um, so it's like we have to agree that's like something here is yeah is true is unchanging is a fact of the matter and that we're trying to seek that from different angles from different points of view and so yeah I wasn't sure where you wanted to take that but I just wanted to echo on the
Yeah, I think the major part of this is, and this has been the major criticism of metamodernity, is that um, it claims to want to unify all these things, but doesn't have a plan to like what the unity is supposed to be for or what it's supposed to look like.
right
And I think that's the best criticism that I've heard, is that
yeah
you don't. It's the same thing about someone saying like, well, we want to make the world better. I'm like, well, what does better mean? What are you
right
trying to shoot for? And it can't just
no
be
painting
like no
no
pain,
painting
right?
has been right well no painting has been painted of what they believe this is
Mm-hmm.
right it's like you see those coexist bumper stickers or whatever and it's like oh that's like that makes me feel warm and fuzzy inside until you start realizing it's like wait a second like there are things that are truly incompatible
Mm-hmm.
like you like different this is different than like paradoxes of faith and belief systems but It's like, oh yeah, we can have this and have that. It's like, no, you can't. You can't have that. And I'm struggling to come up with some
Well,
real tangible examples of that. But
and this has been one bit I've been thinking about a lot, is that um this idea of tolerance itself is a thought, like is not above all the other systems of thought, right? It's not it we think that, like, all these little religions, like, they keep fighting each other, but what they need is tolerance, and we have the tolerance and we're above it, and then we can look down on all the religions and say they should get along. But the problem is, you're not up here, you're down here with everyone else. So the tolerance is
right,
not is one of the religions in the fight with each other. and
right.
and the tolerance beating the crap out of the other religions for not being tolerant is part of the
Is
fight.
intolerance. It's a yeah.
Yeah,
That's not a paradox. That's a contradiction.
yeah, and it's part of the
Yeah.
fight, and so it's very ironic, and it's part of the, I'd say it's part of the semblance, or the remnants of the modernism. The um a guy named Paul Vanderklay has the monarchical vision. It's the vision that, like, I'm king over all of it, and I can see how everything works together. And if you only, like, talk to me, I could tell you, like, if you made these little changes in here. But little do you know that you're one of the peasants. You're in the story, and you can't separate yourself. This has been one thing that's also mentioned about talking about the Earth revolving around the sun. You have, like, Galileo and Copernicus, and they're having these discussions, and the major pushback was not because that people didn't think that this was not a new idea that the Earth revolved around the sun. The issue with the idea of the Earth revolving around the sun is that you need to remove yourself from your body to be able to go onto the outside in space and see the Earth revolving around the sun. It's assuming a perspective that's not yours, which is a step that is necessary in some ways, but it's a really dangerous step, because as soon as you do that and it gets applied to morality and all these other things, you run into really dangerous situations. And
Yeah.
that's why there's this whole kind of bit about, well, the sun does revolve around the Earth, because from a human's perspective, if you take, and physics will tell you this, like, it matters what perspective you take, and the math will still work out.
Right.
Um, there is no observer in physics that is still. Like, it doesn't exist. Everything is moving, and so there are things that seem more correct, but really you're just another observer. But it doesn't mean the math isn't true or the math doesn't work out. And there is a certain sense in which it's more true that the Earth revolves around the sun, but it's hard to say from what perspective you're taking when you're saying that. And so
Totally.
maybe you're taking the
Something
perspective
that
of the
would
sun. Maybe that might be it. But
yeah. Something worth asking here, since we're talking about metamodernism, um, is tolerance a tenet of metamodernism, or would that be wrong to say? Like, I haven't read enough about it, or really,
I'm still
I'm not
exploring.
embedded in that conversation, but I'm curious what your view is on that in terms of the metamodernist apologetics. Is tolerance a tenet, or is it?
So I'm still learning a lot about a lot of this. So a lot of this is me still exploring, and a lot of this is really new too. In general, like,
Yeah, yeah,
this is not a well defined field. Um, but often I see it, like, in the way people talk about it, it's considered like a major importance. Like, this idea that, and I think it comes in its best form. It's everybody has something to offer. Like, everybody has something that they can bring to the table that that
sure,
that is a reflection of some sort of truth. They have little bits
yeah.
of it, and when you bring them together, you're gonna have something better than if you just stuck to one thing. Um, how that plays out in
And in a lot
tolerance
of
is a little iffy.
yeah, and I think I mean, I think the statement you just said is universally true. Like that's just the
Hmm.
truth. It's like there are things that other cultures have figured out that we have not figured out. It's like learning is vital, but I think too often it goes to um, the ignorance of contradictions. When it starts getting into belief systems and things of that nature, it's like, okay, yes, like I'll use the example of like when settlers first came, like European settlers first came to the Americas, the Native Americans taught them how to farm. It's like, okay, you take a fish carcass and you put the corn in there, and then it grows, it feeds the food, right?
Hmm.
Um, but this concept of manifest destiny was like not compatible with the this like balance with nature idea. Um, and so there's and that's I'm not saying which one was right and which one was wrong, right? But
If they
um,
needed to get along, something had to change.
right, right,
Someone had to move
exactly,
and change it, and it was inevitable as long as both groups had the beliefs they did that there was going to be conflict.
right. But nonetheless, it's like the Native Americans got increased technology, and the settlers got food,
Well, they also
and
got
so
technology too, right? They
right,
learned
yes,
the the system of how to grow the crops that were already there.
right, right. I guess yeah, you could call that technology. I guess I say yeah. I guess there's probably a better way of saying that because obviously it's like I don't want to make out that one was more advanced than the other, right? But like one got food, one got guns. It's
Hmm.
like one got health and one got scissors,
Well, and
which is like okay, that's a bad trade, right?
yeah.
But both benefited from that, and so in that aspect, this that goes back to that kind of universal truth of like there's always something to learn from someone.
Hmm.
Uh,
Well, and the whole concept of like guns, for example, guns wouldn't have reached Europe if black powder had not been invented in China. And that was also
right,
a
precisely,
certain amount
precisely.
of trade between cultures, and that's where the kind of question of tolerance comes in, because there's a certain level of like all these cultures are trading with one another. They're having these discussions, yet they might have very complex disagreements with one another on how they see the world. And what is we're reaching the point where we have um, a, the world is shrinking to a certain extent. Uh, the internet is bringing everybody into close contact with one another, and there most groups are represented on the internet. There's very few that don't have any participation. Maybe like the Amish or other kind of societies that are not interested in these structures. But when we're really in close proximity, then we have to ask the question, well, how do we manage these differences? Because before we could just keep to our own place, and we could send out traders and stuff, and then the traders can have these discussions, and they can kind of get into the debates. But you know what? Like in the end, they'll come back and they'll just be here, and maybe they'll carry some ideas back with them, and then we can deal with that and incorporate whatever we want. But for the most part, it's super slow. But the internet speeds everything up. And then you have the fracturing. I think this is kind of the postmodern thing. It's postmodern, but it's also very Protestant to a certain extent, of the fracturing of everything into its own like individual denomination and thing. Like you have people who are like Christian Buddhists, and then you have your like whatever that means. Like I still have no concept, but you'll have people who claim to be that, and you have people who claim to be this, and um, you'll have the Baptist church down the street, and then you have the Catholic church, but then you have the Catholic church that's still serving mass during COVID. That's against the other thing, and like how do you even manage all this dysphoria, and how do you bring unity despite the amount of diversity? And I think that's where that's the problem that the meta modern is trying to address, is how can we reincorporate everything back together into something that um, gets us closer to a more unified vision, but yet maintain a diversity within the unified vision.
Right.
And to me, um, and I'm willing to be corrected on this, that sounds really Christian.
Yeah. Yeah, dude.
And it's really hard
Come
to
on.
avoid that. Like it's the whole concept of like early Christianity was, we're going to take this like hyper specific instance of Jesus, and we're going to um, have it be applied to different cultures, but the different cultures aren't going to be doing the same practices. They're going to share some practices with one another, like the really essential practices we'll keep, but everything
Yeah.
else is going to be what, how does this set of beliefs uh, work within your culture. And you see the diversity immediately. You see Ethiopian Christians, their art style and their form of worship, and I don't know if you're familiar with like the way that they train priests, but they train priests from like elementary school age, and they don't teach them like
Wow.
any math. Like you'll have priests who don't know multiplication, but they know like poetry. They'll teach them poetry for like a certain number of years, and then they'll teach them like this, and so they're very highly specialized for this specific role. You have Coptic
Interesting.
Christians who, you know, they're still speaking Aramaic or a form of Aramaic, or no, Coptic aren't, but Assyrian Christians are. You still have the Coptic Christians who are speaking basically like the closest thing to ancient Egyptian we still have on Earth is what they're speaking, and that's how people have been reconstructing that. And so they and there's obviously all these splits that happen within these groups, but to have there's the unity that happens despite the hyper specificity of each of these groups, and I think that's what the meta modern is trying to get, is they're trying to find out like how do we find the best of everything and then find a way to bring it together. And I think
Totally.
that task is way older than any of this.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah,
I was you said it first, but I was gonna say it. It's like, oh damn, that sounds a lot like Christianity. Like,
yeah,
it sounds a lot like what Paul was doing. It's like he went over to Greece and hung out with them for a good long while. You know, and then he started talking about stuff once he learned the culture. It's
hmm,
like, and so I think that's something that modern Christianity needs to learn as well. Is um, there's a difference between um, tolerance and taking the time to understand someone's position. Like you remaining silent before you speak is like, or before you, wow, I should have structured that sentence a little bit better. Let me think about it this way. Um, People are way too eager to oppose something, I feel,
hmm,
before they understand it. Um, and I think that, especially the story of Paul going to Greece, it's like, no, like you need to fully understand the other position before you come up to have the conversation, you know, or start opposing stuff or start convicting people of something. It's like, yeah, there's stuff you don't know.
yeah,
Yeah. And so um, I think that's an important distinction to make between tolerance and what should the I'd like to come up with a really nice, succinct, terminology or here for. Um,
ooh, yeah. I'm not quite sure where to put it.
but you understand
Hmm.
the what
There's
I'm
there's a
saying here.
definite distinction between the two. And what's interesting is there's
Yeah.
a I think it's Dale Carnegie wrote How to Win Friends and Influence People, and I still haven't read the book, but there's this quote that I've heard a few times and I've latched onto, which is um, I don't know if this is a quote. This is an idea that's expressed through the book, but the idea that you need to, when you have a disagreement with somebody, your first step is not to fight them on it. It's to say you're exactly right. Also, and to build off of it. and be
Right.
able to identify like, okay, like you're I'm following you with all this. Like I can appreciate all this work that you're doing. Here, let
Edify their position, right?
yeah.
Validate that they have a point of view
Yeah.
that's valid, right? It's like, okay, you're seeing things this way because you're from there. It's like, don't say you're wrong without trying to acknowledge. It's like, okay, you see things a certain way,
Yeah. And
you know?
and this is the thing, the way that we argue, if we just say you're wrong, you're breaking down everything that they've, like,
Yeah.
they're probably a rational person. They're probably doing all this work, and they're coming at this in something they really believe, and something that's really true to them, like, to in their own construction of everything. They're not lying to you by saying that. And so
Right.
your goal is to be able to say, like, okay, how do I structure this all together where I can be able to say, I separate the wheat from the chaff. Like, what are the bones here that are right, and how do I differ from this? Like, where did we branch
Totally.
off? And then from there,
Where's
then
the
you can
agreement
be
and
you
where's the yeah, yeah.
then you can have the conversation. You can say, okay, well, I totally agree with you. This is something else that I processed that kind of pulled me away from that, and I think that's kind of, I don't know, that's the proper way of going about it. Like, tolerance would be to say,
Absolutely.
oh, you have your thing, I have my thing, and we don't have to agree on this. And
Right. And
there,
to put no effort into understanding it, right? Or maybe you do, but then once you realize the contradiction, you don't confront it,
no,
right? Tolerance does not tolerance does not confront the contradictions. Like that's the big difference between tolerance and respect.
hmm
That would be that's the concise version of this. It's respecting the other side enough to learn, taking the time, like you were saying, to acknowledge that truth that we agree on, that there's something to learn from everyone.
hmm
Acknowledge that truth by spending the time to understand their position, right? And then when you discover, but respect comes when that's the difference between respect and tolerance is when you arrive at a contradiction that you don't simply overlook it, that you acknowledge it, you meet it, you call it out. And it doesn't mean the other person needs to be enemy anymore, right?
hmm
But it means you call it out. And it's like, I respect you enough to learn more about this. It's like this seems to be a problem. It's like if I don't respect you, I'm just going to gloss over that and get what I want from you,
yeah.
right? Like all business, it's like, yeah, like you believe in this. It's like, all right, whatever. I'll just overlook that because we're lucrative. It's a
Well,
lucrative
and
situation or whatever. And
this comes back to the monarchical vision, because it's easy to do that when you say, I'm above all these things, and I see you having these disagreements down here, and you don't have to worry about that. If you just didn't disagree, then we would all be fine. But if once you realize that you're down here, then you actually do have to do the hard work to respect them. You have to say, okay, well, like, we're on the same plane here, and if we're gonna live together, we have to like work these things out. We can't just let this go. And
yeah,
the modern kind of framework of tolerance as the default has been, I think, to it has been the response to diversity of all types. Has been to say, well, the right way of going about this is just saying, is give up and just let everything happen, and don't struggle with it. Just give in, and everybody else will also give in, and we'll all be fine. But the problem is
yeah,
that's not the way it all works, because
yeah,
beliefs matter. I think that's the main piece, is that what you believe
totally,
actually impacts the way you are in the world. And so
totally,
you'll find
totally.
yourself in places where um, certain things that are against your conscience are being represented in the government and in policies around you. You'll see your country going to war in places that maybe you think you shouldn't be going to war in for any reason. And so it all has
Well,
to.
that's the macro, but it also appears in the micro. It's
Oh
like
yeah.
from interactions with friends, it's like someone getting ousted for a belief, and it's like, oh wait, that's like you don't respect them enough to have that disagreement and try and sort it out and still be like respecting each other, like respect versus yeah,
And I want to make sure that this doesn't come across as also we all have to agree on the same thing, because I don't think that's true.
No, that's the point. That's the
Yeah,
point. It's
like
that's the
you
difference
like.
between respect and tolerance is respect provides for disagreements.
Mhm.
It allows the moving forward, not leaving the potholes behind you,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
It fills the pothole. It fixes it mends the stitch. It you're
The
paving the road behind you
mhm.
as you're going. Whereas tolerance is just like I'm just getting knocked around here, and everyone else can experience every single pothole I experienced on the way back. It's like,
Yeah.
or you have to travel back up and down that road time and time again with people, and it's like now you're running in that pothole over and over and over again, and you're gonna pop a tire. It's like fill it in with people. It's like, oh yeah, I heard that too.
Yeah.
Let's go. Let's go get sweaty and do something about it. It's like move some dirt, move some gravel, fill
The
it in.
the frame I've had for this, or the quote, I don't know if I stole this quote from someone or if this is a creation of mine, but the idea that tension is what holds bridges up. Like
Yeah,
you
yeah,
need a certain level of like, we know we disagree with each other in this place, and that's how we're able to communicate. And it
yes,
seems
yes,
counterintuitive that to know that this is a like X is a tension point, being something actually useful, but actually having that point of like it's almost a level of, I don't like individuality, but this idea of like separation of people, like to know that there's a unique perspective that's being offered here, and only that person can offer it because their perspective differs from my own. Because if it's the same, then we're just the same person. And there's a certain element of that, of like this blurring of lines between people. Like in the end, we all kind of are the same, or we're all completely different and we're atomized and we're all completely unique, and there's nothing that shares us. And that's kind of the
somewhere in between.
it's the postmodern kind of problem, because in the end it's the same thing. If we're all completely unique and completely separate from one another, and we don't have any shared experience, and we don't have anything to point, then you're
I
all
can
on
do
your
whatever
own.
I want.
Yeah,
Yeah,
there's only one person, right? Because it's me,
yeah, yeah.
and I
And you
can't
can't
share.
tell me anything about what I do
Yeah, and you can't tell me anything about
because
what
it's
I do,
it's
and
my
we're
world. Yeah, yeah, exactly,
or it's the
exactly.
opposite. We all have the shared experience, and we're all the same, and we're all in this one thing, and then you're also just the same person. Like, how can you say
Right,
anything bad about me? Because I'm you, basically, and we're
right,
all this one
right.
amorphous blob, and there's nothing outside and there's nothing inside. It's all the same thing. And so, how do you hold the tension? And it's almost like a series of Venn diagrams that all have to like intersect and come over each other. And it's like, oh, we have this shared area, but we have differences, and like it's a place to communicate. It's like a place where we can actually kind of pull and you know, like wrestle and play, and there's just that's the fun part of life. And uh even though it can be difficult and there's conflict and sometimes it can turn into violence, actually processing these differences is the real way to live and not to ignore them. And I think that's what we're
Totally.
getting back to.
Um, I totally agree with that, and I'll add in my own anecdote here. Um, as a designer, um, whenever you have a partner on a project, um, I always love having the conversation really early on. It's like, hey, if we're not having any disagreements on this, I think we're doing something wrong.
Hmm.
I'd like there to be an agreement between us that we allow for friction to occur. And I
Hmm.
use the analogy of forging. It's like in order to like we are working together in order to make something that helps humanity, right? And in order to do that, there needs to be some friction, some heat, and then we need to take the hammer to it. It's like when you forge, you put this piece of metal into a fire, it gets red hot. You're like searing this piece of metal. You're pulling it out, and then you're slapping it with another piece of metal, and it's like this extremely violent process. But then what comes out of it is this like beautiful tool
Hmm.
for woodworking that you can build a house with, or that you can do surgery with, or that you can do XYZ with. And it's like that that amazing tool that helps humanity is a function of the friction that we allow to occur between ourselves, and then what we do with the heat that we've put into that friction. It's like, so being able, like, I remember having conversations with my good buddy Matt in this project that we did for a medical device, and he and I had probably about a 45-minute. It was like on the edge of a shouting match over the proportions of the rectangle top view of this object. It's like he wanted it to be this and I wanted it to be this, and we were literally just like for 45 minutes disagreeing and talking with each other and running back from the cardboard, cutting out cardboard and putting it on the floor and looking at it, and then sketching and like both on either side of this. And it's like that friction allowed us to come to a better conclusion than if we had just appeased one another and bent the knee.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Well, disagreement happens when you care about something.
Right. And that's, yeah. What's that quote? You have to, I think this is something that I think as an American is really interesting. Like there's a lot of, I've noticed a lot of self-hatred among my friends for being an American. It's like, oh, and don't get me wrong, but like the US is not this like moral high standard of excellence ever, right? But I think that people have lost hope for it largely and are just kind of only degrading it. Like no one has anything good to say about America when you ask them anymore, especially on college campuses, which is ironic to me.
And the most privileged people in the country are all there.
The ones who are benefiting most from our system are the ones shitting on it the most.
Yeah.
Pardon my language. But there's this, what's this quote that I heard recently? It's not mine, but it's, you have to hate your country enough.
Oh, this is Chesterton.
I think so, maybe.
Yeah.
Maybe.
To burn it down and build it like, yeah.
Yeah, you have to hate it enough for it to have things to change, and then you have to love it enough to go in and change it.
Yes. Yeah.
So it's like this dual, like you have to completely be willing to hate this, but you also have to completely be willing to love it. And that was the case with my buddy Matt on that project. It's like, man, I hate where this project is at. We need to be somewhere else. But I love this enough, and I love my brother enough to wrestle with him on this. It's like, and sort it out. And so I think that, but the truth is, it's harder. That's harder to do than just to bend the knee and go with the flow, like on everything, right? It's like, obviously there's a time and place to pick your battles, but we are letting a lot of, I'd go so far as to make the statement that the youth and most of the country at this point are letting battles pass by that we ought to have been in.
Well, and
do I have the wisdom to know which ones are which? I honestly don't know, but that's something that I like in my personal prayer life, I've noticed that I've been getting convicted for. It's like, yeah, you know, I wish you had stood there on that hill a bit longer. I wish, like, I had you kind of dying on that field of battle. And I hope to be a little bit more sensitive to that. But that's something that I think when I look at America and when I look at kind of everyone I interact with, it's like very few people have died on any hill.
Yeah.
Like that's a very uncommon thing for people to be able to say about themselves.
There's a lot of apathy.
Yeah. Yeah. And so that's something that I think we have a lot of the hatred for our country. I don't think we have a lot of the love for our country. But I don't think that's only true about patriotism. I also think that's true about the church.
I think it's true about almost every institution too. It's all about breaking
Totally.
things down, and there's not a lot of love to actually make it right.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. And
and that
so,
it has to do with justice too. There's this idea of like
mm, mm,
there's very little restoration in the way that we treat justice. It's very punitive. It's all about like, okay, this
yes.
person needs to get what
Yeah.
they deserve. And there's a certain sense in which I think it's seen as respectful to say like, okay, there's nothing that we could do to ever restore what's been broken. In these like really hard situations of crime. Um,
Because it's true.
it's
It's
true,
true, right? Yeah.
but
But it doesn't mean
it doesn't mean you do
redemption can't
nothing.
be had.
Yeah,
Right. Right. We're
and how
still
do
called
you?
to redeem. Yeah.
We have to make something of it. Like we have to do something with it. We can't just let it sit broken on the ground. And
Well, we can, but
yes, but there are whole
what's that
numerous
do?
problems. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Yeah.
What you're going to be left with is junkyard because everybody breaks someone else, and um, yeah, it's the whole eye for an eye thing all over again, and we've returned there, and we just pretend it's not the way it is, and so part of that is forgiveness, which I think is really really difficult, and I think part of it's difficult because I don't think anybody knows what it is anymore to a certain extent. It's not saying like, okay, you can keep hurting me.
Yeah, it's
That's
not tolerance.
no, it's
It's not
not.
tolerance.
And I think
It's
that's the
it's
major piece of
it's
it.
respect.
Hmm.
I think it's
Respect,
forgiveness requires
respect for the
respect
person, for both people, which I think is interesting.
exactly for yourself and for the other because it not only forgiveness honestly most of the time helps you more than it helps the other person.
Yes.
Like
Yeah.
that's the important thing. If you're living life, it's like, oh, I can't believe what they did to me. It's like, and obviously, I'm not telling people what to do, right? Like, there people need to go through their proper process of grief. Like, there are very extreme circumstances that I have never experienced, and so I don't want to sit here and act like I'm telling
Hmm.
victims of a murder or rape or some horrible crime against humanity, just forgive them. Like it's not what I'm saying. There's
Yeah.
processing. It takes time and it takes prayer and it takes a lot, right? But what I'm saying is the process of forgiveness frees you up to to go and redeem what has been taken from you.
Yeah.
Like it's about being able to go forth even though that shit happened. It allows you to move forward and and do what you're made to do.
Yeah.
And even though you've experienced that crap, and so
Well,
um,
I saw a video and I think it captured this perfectly where a mother is in court and she's um, at the trial of the person who killed her son, which was a school shooter. And the school shooter's horrible. He's like he does not care about this all. He's ready to just rot in prison basically at this point. He doesn't care about all any of this. He thinks it's
really
funny.
indignant and
Yeah,
yeah,
and the mother has this framed so well because she carries both perfectly about like no this person deserves to be in prison for the rest of his life, and I know that um the punishment I would have for him would not even fit the possible like the crime that he committed. Like I know that justice can't be found inside whatever I could even provide to this situation. But she also says that like, you know what? But I'm going to have to forgive you because if I don't forgive you, then you're going to continue to control my life and you're going to live in my head for the rest of my life. And I can't have that either because you're not just killing my son, you're killing me. And I'm letting you do that. And so being able to say like letting it go, but then also being able to trust. And it is super difficult, but it is I think she captured it of like being able to find this balance between the two.
it's and that I would say is an example of paradox, not contradiction.
Hmm.
That's that balance that you're saying. It's like this understanding that there's such a thing as justice.
Hmm.
Like it is what you did was unjust, right? But I'm perpetuating injustice if I let you live rent free in my head
Yeah.
in this way, right? Um, and also if I still hold you to that constantly, it's like, um, yeah, yeah, that's a great example of
Hmm.
that.
Well, and the thing is,
Of
like, he's not in the forgiveness. It's not letting him go free, which I think a lot of people think
yeah,
is the idea.
yeah,
Is that forgiveness is now you don't have to face the consequences of your actions, and that's not at all what forgiveness means. It means it's again something that's internal. It's like I'm not going to hold on to you. I'm going to let this play out, however it will, whatever the justice system is, but I'm going to let myself be free of this. And that often is a process, but it's huge. And
yeah,
yeah, I think it has a lot to do with like the restoration of a society, of not letting yourself be um you know, just kind of not walked all over, but to a certain extent, like just let everything break and crash down. Um, the
yeah,
postmodern kind of continual just um, breaking down everything to the foundation.
right, yeah, yeah. That's something that call for destruction on institutions by the postmodernists position is something that really fascinates me, especially with its claimed, commitment to tolerance. Um, it's like, yes, our like especially in the case of the U.S. government, it's like yes, some of our founding fathers owned slaves, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we all know now that's unacceptable. Like that's a breach in morality, right? Like that's we all agree that that's wrong. But it's also foolish to say that because they had that fault, that everything they did was evil, and
Yeah.
that everything they built is wrong and should be torn down. It's like you're jumping to one extreme. It's like, should we completely trust the government and give all of our faith to it? It's like, heck no. Heck
Yeah.
no. We've got to be hypercritical of it, but
Well, it's living in the
that's just
tension,
the thing
right?
of
And
it.
that's the tough part. Like to voluntarily enter that point of being like willing to say, hey, things are not as they should be, yet I'm going to continue to work on this. I'm not going
Yeah.
to give up, and I'm not going to. I'm just not even just not give up, but there's a certain level of there's nothing beyond it, and this has been one of the things I've been thinking through is with this nihilist project too that I was working on for a while. Um, your ideas don't only need to make sense; they need to actually be livable. They need to actually
Yeah.
have root in something. Because if you don't have that, then what's the point? Um, nihilism could make sense for all the reasons, and you could list them out, and you can have all the proofs, and you might not know the answer or how any of those proofs are wrong. But just by the very fact that it can't survive, it's parasitic to a certain extent. Um, I think postmodernism, uh, if you just live it out by itself, not as a tool, but it's a way of being. Um, it's parasitic. It can't survive on anything else. It has to continue to eat things. Um, and so that's
Yeah.
the ultimate test is if somebody lives this out, what does it look like?
Totally. Totally. Um, just kind of going back to this concept of balance and kind of being completely this and completely that at the same time. Um, I've had it pop in my head a couple times throughout this conversation. Is narrow is the path.
Hmm.
Narrow is the path, and I think that yeah, it's just as a Christian, like having that truth in the Bible match up to what our intuitions are kind of growing towards in terms of what we're aiming for. Um, I'm reassured by it's just one of those little things that's like, oh yeah, like Lord, you knew that, like you knew this already.
Hmm.
You told us. We just had to fall a couple times to learn the lesson.
Oh yeah.
Um,
I don't know if you've had this experience, but someone tells you something your entire life, and you hear this advice, and you keep being told it, and then suddenly one
over and over
day
and over again.
you fall down, and then you're sitting there, and you're like, wait, that's what that meant. I realize
Oh,
now. And there's nothing anyone could have said to me to make me understand it better. And then you go to someone, you're trying to offer the same advice because you're like, I've been through this, I know this, and you say the same thing that like your grandparents told you, what your parents told you, what the person at church told you, and you can't say it any
what you
different.
read.
You're stuck in it,
Yeah.
and it's infuriating because you're like, no, you don't get it, and the person will speak back to you and they'll say, oh no, I've heard that before, I get it. Like, no, you don't get it yet. You haven't reached that point. You don't get it. So like, let me tell you again, and you say the same thing over again, and it doesn't hit. Yeah, it's that very
There's
thing.
kind of to dive a little further into that experience. I think it was a TED talk, but I remember seeing this lecture by a 911 dispatcher,
Hmm.
so someone who answers the 911 calls. It was this man who he actually claimed to be Buddhist.
Hmm.
So this is going back to there's always something to learn from someone. I'm a Christian, this dude's a Buddhist, but what this dude said like really stuck with me. He says, um, like it's important to take things and write them on the surface of our heart, like that which we know is true and good, so that when our heart breaks, that's what falls into our heart.
Hmm.
What you write on your heart is what will fall into the heart when it breaks.
Yeah.
And so I think that's an example of what's happening here, right? An illustration. No metaphysical like statements being made here. This is poetry that kind of describes an experience that's pretty universal. Um, but I think that there's some real truth to that. It's like, okay, what you spend your time thinking about, even though you're not like you might not completely understand it yet. And there's a bunch of things like that I already know. It's like, yeah, there's all these little words of wisdom and things of spots of truth that it's like, oh yeah, that's cool. It's up here for me, but it takes experiencing something in order for it to sink from here to here.
Yeah.
Um, and so, yeah.
Well, I think you'll see that with I don't know, the funny thing that comes to mind is the Jordan Peterson stuff where, he has his 12 rules for life, and um these are all things that you could see a mother saying to their kids, or something like this is stuff that I'm sure someone has heard before, and when they're reading it, but it was almost like they needed to be in a certain place in their life, and they needed someone else to tell them this in this way, and then it sunk in. And then you have plenty of people who I'm sure, like mothers who I'm sure are mad that like, really, you needed this guy to say this? Like, I've been telling you this your entire life, and it's just something like
Dude,
it.
that's totally true. I think it's not only situation, but it's also who. It's like
Hmm.
I,
Yeah,
I remember the first time someone besides a family member told me I was handsome. I was like, oh, you know,
yeah,
like that's or the first time a family member was like, damn, your breasts stink, or something like that, right? It's like in middle school when you like, were being stupid and not taking care of hygiene and whatnot. Um, but like that hit different than when your mom's like, yeah, you need to brush your teeth, honey. It's like, okay, when she says it, it's like, oh, you're so handsome. It's like, yeah, okay, I hear that all the time. But when freaking Billy tells you, it's like, damn, dude, you need some mouthwash. It's like,
yeah.
oh, Like that one stings a little bit more than when mom says it, right? So it's not only when and where, it's also who,
Yeah.
right?
Well, I have an interesting similarity to your story. I've told this story a couple times, and I actually said it last night too. But um, back in kind of early high school, it's a really tough time in my life, and I don't know, I'm playing video games a lot because, like, I don't know, my other connections are not very strong. I feel like nothing really matters, so I'm just want to play video games. Not that video games are bad, but like that's what I was using to kind
It was
of
a coping. It was
it
you were
was it was
using them as a
coping.
coping mechanism.
Even though I
Yeah,
love
yeah.
video games and I think that there's other pieces to it, but like for the purpose of that, it was coping. And it was my first time playing through Borderlands 2. And towards the end of the game, character called Claptrap says to your character, after this series of events, and you know, you've been through almost the entire game, and he says, "You're a badass." And something when he said that, it just like it made me weep in that moment of like having someone say something that's like affirmational, that I don't know. I never felt like anybody who was outside of my family say something that was like, you know, something that hit so home. And yeah, it was something that I didn't know what to make of it in the moment. It was almost embarrassing, right? Like, okay, this character who is scripted, and he says that to everybody. Like, if you're gonna play the game, everybody's gonna run into this moment. Like, it's part of it. But that just hit in that moment, in that time and place, and even if it was like this automated signal through my computer, it it was exactly what I needed in that moment to feel that feeling.
Totally. And I think, first of all, that's an awesome story. Like that. Uh, I don't think you're alone in that at all. I think um, I don't think video games get enough credit from especially the older generation
Yeah.
because they don't understand it. So, but I'm completely with you that I think video games should get a little bit more credit for our formation than they do.
Well, I think there's something
But I don't.
to, oh, real quick. I think there's something to
Yeah,
also
yeah,
the danger of something, because people talk about the dangers of video games. And it's true, right?
mm,
Because you're
yeah,
immersed in something. And so what you experience when you're immersed in something does have an impact on you.
yeah.
But that danger is equivalent to almost power. Like there's a certain level of like in something's ability to do a lot of things, there's also a lot of power to do good things. Or to
Yes,
And so if you see things as tools, then you can see them in their proper place. But as if
yes,
you put this valiance on top of them, you've kind of exiled that entire thing out, and there's no place for it. And
totally.
it's the removal of it's like the opposite of tolerance. It's the far end that we kind of haven't touched on very much, but it's the more kind of traditional, this is right and this is wrong, valiance that doesn't account for all the little things that are within it. That things are
Totally.
not exactly one thing or the other, for the most part.
Totally. Totally. Well, I grew up hearing that a
Yeah.
hammer could either be used to build a house or it could make a great murder weapon.
Hmm.
It's like it's 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 not the hammer. It's what you do with the hammer. So it's not the video game. It's 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 how you make the video. It's how you've designed the video game.
But there are also
So
tools like swords, right? That you're not going to be hammering nails in with a sword.
no,
Like is
you're
it
always going to be harming a body with that
or
sword,
cutting or some sort of act like this. And
right?
there's a
But
place
it's
for it.
in what service are you doing that? Are you doing it to save life? Or are you doing it to harm life?
Hmm.
Like same with guns, same with knives, same with intelligence, same with propaganda, same with uh, anything that has an influence on the world is 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 neutral until humans get their hands on it and do something with it. Like
But
that's
I will say there are certain tools that are inherently more dangerous in the sense that or they have a bent towards this could be used for a lot more evil than sometimes the good. And so I think there is a little bit of that where it's like, maybe this is kind of wrong, so I might need to be corrected on this. But guns fill this interesting thing where it's like, well, swords at least you can imagine outside of just harming people, you can cut things. But I guess you could cut things in a bad way too. So like that.
Let me throw this one at you though.
Okay.
You can use a gun to shoot out a door, like a lock on a door, in order to get to someone who's harmed inside, right?
Yeah.
Generally not a good idea. I'm not proceed with caution, right? Like I'm not telling people that to do this.
Don't do that.
But a gun has equal capability to save life than it does to take life. I would say. So I would.
I think that's fair. Yeah.
But I will say it is designed, like the purpose of a weapon is to take life.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So I'm not disagreeing on that, but where you and I might disagree,
I think
I'll throw this out there.
Yeah,
is
go
that
ahead.
it's when and why you take a life.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And it's only when it's necessary. So I think a really common run right now is like, okay, school shooter is going from classroom to classroom, and you have a shot on that school shooter. It's like, that's there's an argument to be made on both sides, right? It's like, but for me, it's like if they're gonna murder more people, it's like, man, I think the gun is what saves someone in that case.
I think it's part of my malicious nature, or like some sort of like humanness, where I think the imagination for doing harmful things is a lot stronger than being able to think of like the useful things. And it's not to say that those things aren't there, because I think they are. But I can think of like 100 different things I could do with a knife. Like I could stab a hole in a wall. I could like, cut someone's tires. I could do all these things. It's harder to think of the good things. Like I could cook a meal. I could cut some vegetables. I could do that. And so
I think you could carve wood and make a spoon. You could
exactly
use it to make a house. You could use it to pull splinters out of someone. You can use it to do surgery and save a life. You can do it. So I think some of that.
Well, no, and that's why I think I don't think the tool has a variance. I think our imagination sometimes is geared in the wrong way and has to be readjusted, or there's more work that has to be put into thinking of ways that are not breaking down but are building up.
Yes. And I think, but you are right, and especially in the case of guns, it's a little bit more difficult because its purpose is destruction, mechanical destruction. Its purpose is mechanical harm.
Yes.
Right. But what that forces you to think about then is situations where physical harm and mechanical damage is necessary in order to preserve or save life.
And I think that's more controversial too. I think that's a piece of it that comes as well.
Yes.
Because there are some people who will say that there is no case for it.
There's no,
which I think,
and so
yeah, I don't agree with, but
I'm open to be convinced, right? Like I'd love to have that conversation with someone, but as I stand here now, it's like, yeah, I'm of the opinion that there is a time and a place to go to war and defend life.
Mm-hmm.
There are plenty of examples of people misusing mechanical damage, right?
And I think you don't have to think very far in history to think of places where, there's a point where intervention is necessary in some sense.
Right.
And
right.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying, like, I don't want this to be misconstrued as war is good.
It's a tool.
War is at times necessary. Never is war happy or good or like always like, oh yay, war. Like, no, wrong.
And I think we can agree
sometimes it's necessary.
It's an overused tool. Like I think we can both agree on that.
Absolutely.
There are plenty of times where something else could have stood in that place, but
Absolutely.
when you have a certain set of tools available, sometimes one of them seems like it could solve the issue more reliably, and you don't take the route that might be the most beneficial to everybody.
It's also solve the issue. It depends how you're
That's
looking
true.
at the issue,
Yeah.
because there are always more problems that come
Hmm.
out of war, right?
Yeah.
So if you can frame it in a different way, I think that's good. One thing that I'd like to zoom right back to your story about
Yeah.
um, video game, and like when your heart breaks and you really learn something that you've been told your whole life, but now you know it with conviction. Um, what something that you said at the end of the story is like you'd been through the whole video game, like this whole experience, and then you received it. Um, and I'm of the opinion that that's important. That like your degree doesn't mean as much if you just like was smooth sailing through school. You know what I
Hmm.
mean? Like if you had to struggle, if you had to scrape, if you had sleepless nights, if you had like real struggle going through that, that degree is going to mean a lot more to you. That accomplishment is going to mean a lot more to you. Um, is going to contribute to that like that openness to learn new stuff, to absorb that which you've been told your whole life. And so I think that's something that's I wanted to throw out there. Is it's not only I guess the process of breaking your heart necessitates this like this build up, this process.
Hmm.
And so I don't know where I was going with that, but it was something I wanted to call
Yeah.
out before.
Well, and I think the writing on your heart is made up of, and I don't know if this is kind of going off the rails a little bit, so feel free to redirect if we need to, but is daily habits or the people you spend your time around or the things you listen to. You're constantly having all these things um, that are in your minds that are in the background or again written on your heart, and you make some of that's environment, some of that's the choices that you're making, and as you live your life, all of these things are coming in, and if you're not thinking about it, you have all these things on your heart that you're not quite sure what they are, but then when it breaks, it's it all kind of it all is revealed. Like you
Yeah,
realize what was there.
yeah,
And it's not easy to see what's already there. Like that is a process in itself. And I've made a few videos trying to give that advice of like, okay, hey, like if you don't know what's already there, maybe you should take a look, and then if you think that stuff shouldn't be there, maybe you should start changing like the things that you're watching, the things you're
yeah,
listening to. um Maybe you should redirect that to something else, because
totally.
once you reach the bottom, you're not going to be in control of what you have. Like you have only what you brought with you, and if you don't have what you need, then you can end up in a very difficult place.
Yeah. Um, I think a very commonly heard true statement um, that is very much aligned with this, with what you're getting at, is you are the sum of your five closest friends.
Hmm.
Um, and in other words, it's like you are the sum of your influences. And I think that's I think there are things that are inherently unique to us, right? That like we are individuals.
Hmm.
So there are things that we've experienced, and there are things that we are that I think are unique to what God has placed into us from the very beginning. But um, it's like it's still true. It's like guard what's the wow? I should have that on the on speed dial. The take every thought captive, guard your heart. Like, you know,
Hmm.
Bible's really clear. It's like you have to be deliberate about what you let into your mind and your soul. It's like you have to be deliberate about that
Yeah.
because whatever's in here influences this and this. It's like,
Yeah. And I think one key insight from scripture is that um what you're doing reflects what's going on in here.
yes, yes.
And
The fruit of the tree tells you what kind of tree it is.
yes. And so you
Yeah,
can tell yourself you're amazing all you want, but if you're not treating people around you with respect, um, then there's something that's out of whack here that needs to be
yep,
reprocessed and reconfigured.
yep.
Yeah.
You need to get yourself some different soil, man.
Yeah.
Replant, and that's painful.
Well, and that's
That's painful.
a key insight too, is that your environment is extremely impactful on a lot of these things. You'll see that with people who this is like an interesting study I've heard about, and I might be wrong. I might be messing in details up, but they're people with addictions, and they're in a specific environment, and they're in it. And as soon as they're removed from that environment, the ability to get off of those addictions is much easier. But as soon as
With
they're
rats. It was a study with rats and
also
cocaine.
Vietnam too, I think is another case of that. A lot of soldiers who
Interesting.
were doing opiates in Vietnam, taking heroin,
Mm.
and a significant number of them who were doing that in Vietnam, when they came back, a lot of them didn't have the side, like they could just quit and they just didn't work, like it didn't affect them,
Fascinating.
and they
Yeah,
were able
that
to go cold turkey and it was just fine. But they were addicted clearly in Vietnam, and a lot
right.
of that was the environment and just it was different. It was totally a different experience, and so
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
The study with the rats was um, originally what people were doing was they were putting a rat alone into a cage. Um, one water bottle laced with cocaine, one water bottle just regular fresh water. And when the rat was alone, it would always go for the cocaine.
Hmm.
But then there was a subsequent study done where they created this cage that was really enriched. They had toys, they had like drinks, they had pools, and they weren't alone. They had like 10 rats in this cage. And when you had the community of rats, there was no one going for the cocaine water. It was
Yeah.
all it was all for that. So it's not only, yeah, that goes back to your environment, right? It's
Hmm.
like, yeah, if you put the rat all alone in its room with its computer, right? And no friends. It's like, yeah, you might be going for the cocaine, dude. Like that's that. But if you go and put effort into changing your environment and getting people around you and things like that, it's like, man, the rents tell us freshwater's fine once you got friends.
Yeah. Well, and I think there's a certain level of like regulation helps, or regulation is easier when your environment is
Yes.
properly organized. I think the
Yes.
problem that we'll run into though is that there's plenty of people who have an idea of what a good environment is, and they're pushing for it, or they see other people in those environments and they will push the blame onto that, or they'll be like, it's your fault I'm not in there, or you're in there and you're failing, therefore it's more on you. And the thing is, our cultural vision of what a proper society looks like is not a proper society. It's the idea that, like, if we were all just living in the suburbs and we all had this thing, nothing would go wrong. If we were all Wall Street bankers and we all just got to have all this money coming in, and let's just assume that the economy could support everybody being really rich, and we could just have all we wanted, and it would all work out. And the thing is, often the people who are in the places that we look to as the highest places are often the people who are the worst off, like mentally, emotionally, spiritually. Like
The most, yeah,
they're
screwed up.
they are at the
Yeah.
bottom. Um, I mean, one show that comes to mind. I mean, this is a theme that I think has been under evaluated in kind of modern culture, but you have um, One Punch Man is a show and
Mm.
is an anime, and then also was a comic series about this guy who has everything, has all the power in the world. Like he's extremely strong, and he's bored because he's a superhero and he can save everybody and whatever, but no one ever challenges him. Like he's never pushed beyond, like pushed to his limits. And so there are a few moments in I think early on where he fights somebody and it looks like it's close, and he beats the guy, and the guy is like on the ground, and he's broken, and he asks him like, you weren't trying, were you? And he's like, no. Like, and he's sad because at least he could pretend, but it could never fit the level. You see this with oh man, I'm gonna forget his name, Bobby Fischer, the famous chess player. And you see this with a lot of major chess players too. But the chess players who are at the peak of playing chess, they memorize everything, and they have all these processes, but they never really get to play the game. Like it's not a game anymore because they just win, and they can just, you know.
Like when you learn about tic-tac-toe, it's like that formula for winning. It's like if you go first, you can win every time.
Yeah, exactly. It's the game hasn't been solved, but for all our
Right.
purposes, it has been, and it can't be fun anymore because it's now been so analyzed and broken down that we have these ways of winning, and so you just win. And you see there's a really fascinating 60 minutes following Bobby Fischer and his
Mm.
sad life. Like it's towards the end of his career because he ends up retiring because he says he hates chess, and he just goes on his own and has his own problems. He's not a perfect man by any means. And this clip like suggests it. I might link it below, but he's being interviewed by these guys from 60 Minutes, and he's living alone in a hotel room, and all he does is sit at a table with a chessboard and a book. And he doesn't have a coach because like who can coach the best chess player in the world? And he sits there looking at all the past games of his opponent, and he's playing through the games out on this chessboard alone in a hotel room, and that's his life. And they bring him out to dinner, and they bring about like some other people there, and they find out it's his birthday, and they get him a birthday cake, and he's mad about it. He's like, send that back. Like he makes it like extremely uncomfortable. He's like, no, I don't want that. Like, get it out of here. Um, and it's this. If we have everything we want, maybe that's not what we want. maybe our conception of what success looks like is not success, but it's actually the worst we could possibly imagine. And so finding out, how do we find out what is it that we need, right? Like what is it? We know what we want, but what do we need? Maybe is the right way of putting it. I think I took us on a weird tangent, but
No, I think it's true. That's the first time I heard that story, so I'm still processing it. But yeah, it's yeah, it goes back to that, like tying it back to what we were talking about before. It's like your environment is
mm-hmm.
is very important, right? So
Yeah.
yeah, and I think a large component of that is isolation, and I think that's um, I know it's the zeitgeist right now to hate on um, social media, but I think that I think that's one thing the mainstream has gotten right. It's like there needs to be a change there, man. It's like the too many of us are believing the lie that social media is satisfies enough of our human need um, for it to be the only thing that we need. And
Mm-hmm.
it's
Well,
it's a lie.
there's the
It's
old
false.
saying, "Don't hate the player, hate the game," and I think that's what we're running into here. Is that we have this conception of what the game is, and
Yeah.
we can just try to win it. And so if we you know, if the game is to get the most likes, we're gonna make a game out of this, and we're going to get the most likes, and you're gonna become a Mr. Beast, and you're gonna make all your thumbnails perfectly crafted, even if they look a little like weird, but they're perfectly crafted to get people's attention. And they're gonna click on the video, and it's perfectly like laid out and edited so people stay as long as possible and it's as interesting as possible. And that's the game being played. It's not to make like a good video per se, but it's redefining a good video as the video that gets the most engagement and the highest watch time. And as soon as you make that the game, then you're gonna get all the outcomes of it. And so you have to find out what game you're playing, and is it the right game? Like what is
Yeah,
this going to encourage?
totally. That's what I was gonna say is like, yeah, what game have you been playing?
Hmm.
It's like, what's the what does winning look like?
Yeah,
And winning that game, the main game in this world now, the winner of that game is alone in their mansion. Uh, yeah, with no real connection. So
exactly. Yeah.
hard pass, hard pass on that. I'd like to play a different game.
Well, it's funny because it's all done for connection to a certain extent. Like everybody's told that the success route is going to get you the connection, right? You feel lonely now, but once you're successful, you're going to be what everybody wants, right? You're going to get all the women and you're going to get all the respect and fame from other people. But in the process of
Business
getting to
connections, opportunities. Yeah, yeah.
but in the process of getting to the point where you're you have to reject connection at the bottom. Like you have to say like you have to turn down your family in order to pursue the success. And then once you get the success, all your friends that you made along that way, you have to like push them away to be able to get further up. And then as soon as you get to the top, you realize, "Oh, I could have had I could have been satisfied with any of these points along the way, but I refuse to be satisfied in order to get the best version." So this is the saying, best is the enemy of better, something like that, where in the pursuit of perfection you miss something that's actually better in the process. Like you're refusing to make a compromise at any state, and if you had just made a compromise, you would have been in a million times better place. But because
Totally,
you pursued perfection, perfection was your downfall.
totally. And I think it's maybe it's not right to think of it in terms of compromise, but in terms of like value system. It's like, okay, what are you valuing over this? Like, okay, you're valuing time spent on crafting thumbnails over dinner with your family. You're choosing to um, you know, go to Walmart and do a stupid video in the parking lot with people. I don't know. That's a stupid example. I'm trying to think
I
of like a one of those famous videos of like,
well,
you know,
I think a
people
lot of
doing
this,
silly stuff, but it's like
yeah,
you're exchanging uh short-term, like shallow attention span on an internet website over in-person human connection. Um, and I don't think that's always true, right? Like there's some awesome videos now of live streamers going out and hanging out together and having antics and you know doing silly stuff. But by and large, it's just like, man, I don't know. Live streaming might be a little bit of an exception to that um,
it depends, right?
compared to videos. But yeah, it definitely depends. It definitely depends. Like I think in the like talk about something like OnlyFans, like that like that's clearly falling short
Well,
of
it's making
like
everything a
what
product, right? And I think that's kind of what we're pointing
exactly.
to is that
Right,
um,
right,
you're no longer living life; your life is the product, and
right.
this has to do with sacrifice too. It's always funny to me to kind of think back to people talk about, um, you know, the the people back in the day. They used to sacrifice animals and people to the gods and for prosperity, and like we don't do that anymore. And then you look at today and you're like, man, this guy isn't hanging out with his family because he wants to make a bunch of money, and it works. Like he sacrificed his family for all intents and purposes in order to get
Or his
success.
time with them at least. Yeah.
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 Um and
It's
I
true.
don't think you have to do, and you can do that with anything. You can say like, if you, a major thing is like sacrificing animals was your way of giving your money in order to get something. And if you sacrifice, and you'll see this in anything, like even if it doesn't directly affect the thing that you're trying to do, you putting your resources towards something improves your devotion to whatever you're doing. And I think that's not super clear to the average person. That but you'll hear it sometimes, right? Like you just need to be more committed. And maybe that means, being like giving up your high paying job in order to do this. That is you giving up money in order to pursue this, whatever X
Yeah.
is.
And I think it's I think a common thought these days, and I think it's partly true in some ways of looking at it, but I also think there's a fallacy behind it that, oh, more resource means more options,
Mm-hmm.
but um,
And options are good.
and options are good, right? Like being able to
Well,
choose, right?
no,
But
this is the question. Are options good? There's
well,
this has been one thing
again,
that's really
it
interesting.
depends what game you're playing, right?
Well, there's this interesting study that was done, and again, I'm gonna mess up the details, but there's something along the
Sure.
lines of like measuring the stress of an individual when given choices. And so you have like all the shampoos on the aisle, and it just fills up like an entire thing. And like, what kind of choice are you gonna be able to make from all that? Like, are you
Right.
gonna look at every single one and look at the back of the bottle, and I'm gonna compare all of them and do a cost analysis? Like, it's just
Totally.
too much
Yeah.
information. But if I'm given 3 shampoos, it's super easy. I can be like, okay, this one doesn't match my hairstyle. This one's a little bit more expensive. I'm gonna get this one. And it's better than having no options, right? Because no options is everybody has the same, and it's not good. But you can't have infinite number of options because the space is too wide to be able to even reasonably process. So how do we kind of focus? Sorry, I interrupted because I know you were on a roll, but
No, no. I think I was going in. I'm going to take this in a different direction, but I think this direction also just supports the point
mhm,
that more resource does not equal like end result success.
yeah,
In my mind, it's like yes, you can have more money, you can have more like in the old days, you can have more sheep, but it's like you can't have more time. It's like
well,
your time,
what's
what
success?
you
That's and it comes
right,
back to the game, right? Like
right.
how, yeah,
But I guess I mean I think there's this kind of there's this subconscious understanding that it is like meaning a lot of our meaning comes from like who we have around us like okay yeah like one of them is family, one of them is friends, one of them is like true meaning, and it's like when you start sacrificing those things like you said in the name of money, it's like damn, okay, you're lying to yourself if you think okay now that I have money I can go back and
I can buy it
do
now.
that. It's like yeah, exactly. No, you have to. That's one of those things that's just like you can't take your hand off that wheel. It's like it's no matter how much money you're making, you still have to devote time to like putting in the time to that other thing, whatever it is that you're really finding that you put meaning to. So
Yeah. Well, this has been one thing that I've thought, and I know that this has gotten some criticism, but I say this, I think the same thing, just on the other side of it. So you'll often hear like, if you just try hard enough, you can become successful. And I like successful in the sense that you can make money and you can do it. And I think I think that's true. Like I think if you are willing to sacrifice everything, you can get that. I don't think that's where anybody wants to be, and I think for the most part people realize that and they won't sacrifice everything to get there. But I think if you put your mind to it, there's not much that you can't do in the end. Like I think you can get there. Um but I think the problem is getting there is not a good idea. Like it'd be better if you weren't there. Again,
Yeah.
the meaning thing where it's like what you're looking for is the meaning, so pursue the meaning and not the thing that will get you there. Like don't
Yeah.
confuse the means for the end. Um
Yes.
and I don't think
Yes.
meaning is the end either. I don't think I think
No.
that's also
I think
the authenticity kind of thing.
totally. I think um, truthfully, I think as a Christian, I would say it's a relationship with God.
Mhm.
Um, because who better to tell you what game to play at any given moment? It's like sometimes like you've got to play the game of popularity, right? And get people to follow. And then sometimes you got to play the role of the prophet and get everyone pissed off at you. And it's like, it's like,
Yeah.
you know, be the what appears to be the enemy, but the truth sayer. It's like
Why
who
are you
better to
booing?
tell
I'm telling
you
the truth, you know?
right? Exactly, exactly. And so, but I guess like to who knows better when to do what
Yeah.
than the Lord, right? And so there's time to you know defend the fort and die on that hill, and there's a time to lay down your sword and surrender, and there's a time to you know be right, like to go into the conversation, the argument, the debate, and come out correct. And then there's a time to put the relationship first,
Yeah.
to be like, no, I like that's a great perspective, not wrong because of this and that, right? And so um, yeah, I'd like to think that we can cultivate wisdom as to when to apply what, but ultimately, like, where does wisdom come from? Like,
So
I think that's
can I give you my conceptualization of all this?
yeah,
So we we have all these things that we could prioritize. We have just an infinite number of things. And so how do you choose any one thing? And I think a lot of people choose money because money seems to be something that you can exchange for other things. But the problem is when you give everything up for money, then it's very hard to change money into anything. Like once you have it, it's like okay, it's just stuff that you can get stuff with. It's on the material level, and so that's kind of the base, like the bottom of the pyramid is like the stuff, and you get one level up, and you get like friends and family maybe are up here. You could other levels in between, but we're just gonna say like relationships you could put up here. But as soon as you kind of build all your meaning off of other people, if anything happens to that person, like it just crumbles. Just like with stuff. Like if you go bankrupt, then what's gonna happen? If you if like God forbid your wife dies of cancer, like what's going on? Um, and so you can
yep.
take any of these things and make it
Or
your
you get betrayed by someone, like your best
yes,
friend goes
yeah.
and tells someone
Like
a secret,
no
or
no matter
or
how much you do something or are invested in something, you can't change, especially a person, you can't change what they think. Like they are their own person in the end, and that's their prerogative. Um, and then you have at the very top, we would say like God or something, like the proper organizing principle. And so if you take any of the things under the top, it's all kind of chaos because as soon as you put something that isn't supposed to be at the top, it it can go horribly wrong. But if you put the proper thing in the proper place, then everything should work out under it.
yeah,
And that's what
I
wisdom
would
is.
say yes, yes.
And it won't look
I
the
would
same for
say
everybody
though,
too. That's another
yeah,
key.
yeah. I would say though that there's a part of me that um, is cautious though. Like I would hate a listener to then say that we're to to hear from this that we're saying, oh, following God yields certain circumstances. It's like I don't think that's entirely correct, right? Like, um,
You're not going to get a lot of money. I mean,
well,
yeah,
here's the thing. I would say that you could,
you
you very
could.
well might, but you also very well might be called to live
You
somewhere
might
that's
be Francis of
absolutely
Assisi.
atrocious.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
And
You might be called to martyrdom. You
yeah.
might be called to work at like a really annoying job somewhere. You
Yeah.
might be called to be an engineer and work on really high consequence, stressful stuff, right? You might be called to be a pastor and forsake all like professional aspirations that you had before. It's like so um it's hard for me to communicate this, but
Well, and
I think it'd be important for me to make sure that a listener doesn't conflate
let's put
the
this back
submission to
into,
God.
like, I think it's important to notice this pyramid or whatever. In the pyramid is also feelings of happiness and like whatever you want. Resentment. You can make resentment the thing that you're pursuing. Like that can be the top thing. Or it can be happiness. Like I want everything that will just make me the most happy. And so you can organize everything under that. You can say like, well, I want my family like if I'm going to be as happy as possible, my family's going to be here, money's going to be down here, charity's going to be right here. And that is a,
God might be somewhere over there or
yeah,
whatever.
and
Yeah,
it's just like, well, whatever, however that formats. But it's all going to collapse because like being happy is not the way that it is not the end. Like it's part of the plurality of life. But it's when we properly organize, then you can see that a good life is made up of all these pieces. And again, this comes back to the game. If the frame of your game is life, then it's going to be have the best time throughout that life because it's going to end. And so why not use whatever you have? But if you understand that everything that you do is pointed to something greater, and not that, you know, I think it's stupid to talk about like afterlife stuff. I don't think afterlife is important for this conversation even at all. Like at all. It's about living a good life. Like, and it's so hard to kind of communicate this, but it has to do with sainthood. It has to do with all these kind of pieces of like living a life that's not only like that happens to be good for other people, but it doesn't even like have to be. It could be on your own in the middle of a desert, and like that's all you do. But there's something about like a proper organizing principle. It has to kind of do with the Tao, like moving with the universe as it presents itself to you. There's a certain element of that. It's participating fully and correctly, being fully present. There's an element of that too. Um, as soon as you're living for other people, that's where it comes. It's living outside of yourself. It's not pointed in on you.
yeah. I think what you just said there at the end is definitely true. I'm trying to decide whether or not our game analogy has run its course or not, or whether we can redeem it into what we're talking about, like into this framework. Um, I'm
Um,
having a hard time.
the way Peterson will put it is he talks about the rats that they wrestle with one another, and if one rat wins every wrestling match, the other rat won't play because it's not useful, right? Like if I'm gonna lose every single fight that I get into, why am I gonna get into a fight? I'm just not gonna fight anymore. But it's if the bigger rat decides to let the little rat win once in a while, then they can keep playing. And so the game, if you frame it as win the fight that's in front of you, then you're not going to be getting into any, or not fight, sorry, if like the wrestling match, because the wrestling match is not about winning or losing. Like the wrestling match, if you frame it around that, sorry, then you're going to stop having wrestling matches. It's just not going to happen anymore. You're not going to be able to play the game. But if your goal is I want to just play the game as much as I can with my friends. I'm going to let them win some of the time. And then we're going to be able to play more. And whatever comes out of that, whatever. And that's kind of what's going on here, is that if your scope is too small and you don't see the stuff on the outside, you're missing out on everything else. But as soon as you expand the scope, then you can properly orient yourself and saying like, oh, I don't have to be the winner in this. I don't have to be happy right here. I'm allowed to be sad or whatever I'm feeling. And then I can properly see that this is all part of a grander game that's even bigger. I talked about this with Neil, how he talks about games and how he used to play games and he would just like play a lot of video games. So he's kind of stopped because he kind of got bored. And then he saw that actually making video games in itself is a game, because you're learning the tools and you're doing this. And as soon as you expand your vision of what a game can be, then you can incorporate everything, and then you can begin to expand it even further. I don't think this will be satisfying for a lot of people, but I think that it's almost like the best that I have like at my hands to be able to mention or to communicate this.
Yeah, and I think that's coming at it from the bottom up. I wonder if there's like I think I was thinking of it more from like the top down, like the way I don't have worldly reasons why I'm a Christian.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think like um, I think part of my acknowledgement as a Christian is me not knowing what game to play. Like I don't know when to play leader. I don't know when to play follower. I don't know when to do these things. And so maybe that's just my individual faith walk, and someone has like a really clear conviction about what game they're meant to play. I don't think that's completely out of the question, but for me, I am truly not motivated by like circumstance as much as I'm motivated by doing what like I want to do what God wants me to do. Like I want, even if that means I go and die on a horrible field of battle or by torture or by terrible means, um, like in my mind, I'm okay with that as much as I'm okay with becoming a millionaire or just being like a you know middle class with a family white picket fence, right? It's like
Mm-hmm.
I I don't find myself drawn to like any one of those outcomes. And I guess that's what I'm saying. That's kind of what I was trying to get at the beginning, is like I think if you are um, do not believe a message that says come believe in God for an external circumstance to change. Like
Yeah.
I think that is different than what we are saying here. I think I believe that God is trying to work all things for good. And if I need to be spent like pocket change in order for the best thing for everyone to happen, so be it. And I don't know if that's the right way of thinking about it, but it's the exact same thing as you are saying, right? It's this acknowledgement of there being a bigger picture,
Mm-hmm.
right? And that
Yeah.
faith is basically acknowledging that there is this bigger picture and that I'm a part of it, but what is that part?
And I can't comprehend the entire thing. And I can
It's impossible,
I can
right?
pretend to, right? Like we were saying before, I can do the monarchical vision thing, and I can say like, oh, from up here, I
Exactly.
can see how this all works out. But you don't.
But I think this is also one of the I think that most Christians would agree that this is uh, a metaphysical truth statement about God, is like no matter how far a human gets away from the object to look at it, God is still out here orbiting around the whole thing, seeing it, like seeing every bit of surface area at the same time throughout its entire course of history. Like, and so you can never compete with that. And so that's where faith comes in. It's like
Mm,
God knows better than I do. Tell me what to do. Do you want me to, again,
yeah.
you want me to fight? You want me to bend the knee? You want me to roll over and die? You want me to, you know, make a lot of money? You want me to live really poor? Do you want me to marry? Do you want me to remain celibate? You want me to do this, do that? Like, and I think that might be a little bit of a, I don't go through life asking every single one of those questions. I think I need to do it more. Like be in more constant communion with the Lord in that. But um, yeah, at its core, it's the acknowledgement that I don't know.
Yeah.
Like I'm 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 small and I don't know enough to make all the right decisions, but you do. And yeah, guide me,
Well,
help me do what you want me.
I have a hard time avoiding considering just all of this because I always go back to in my head. There's an element of like Taoism I can't escape to a certain extent. Of like
Mm.
the framing is really helpful of having the Tao being the way, and it's very similar language is used in Christianity as well. As like the Tao is the plan that you can't possibly know, and so your job is to participate in the plan, and um, you could
It's
play
totally parallel,
any
right?
number of parts. Sorry.
It's totally parallel. It's this
Yes.
acknowledgement of truth, like an absolute truth.
Hmm. But it's
Yeah.
incomprehensible as well, and there's a
Right.
certain level of like,
Yeah. Yeah.
okay, and how it plays out is just so interesting. I keep going back to this one section that of the Tao that comes into my mind, which is this idea that if you're going against your enemies in politics and you're both kind of vying for a position, um, I think the Tao says something like, let them have it, like let them rule, and if they do a poor job, they'll be kicked out, and then you can take over, and you can do your thing. But like, why fight about it? Just let it work its course. And it's very much the decentralized from yourself. Like you it's the selfish thing. Like I know what's right. I know what I want, everything for me. I want all this. And it's not detachment. It's not saying like it doesn't matter. Like it's saying like no, I'm going to be willing to give up these pieces, and because I trust that something else was going to work it out better than I possibly can. That there's something greater out there, and it's the letting go, the forgiveness too, right? It's the trust, saying like, okay, I'm not going to hold on to this because I know that holding on to this is going to be bad for me, and
Yeah.
I'm still going to be invested and I'm still going to be present, but I just trust that, that this is going to work out. And it's a difficult path to walk because it's not just one or the other. Because I think it's really easy to kind of go on the I want everything for myself. I want to have the selfishness, and it's also easy to say I just need to let go. I need to just not have anything. I need to not think anything's important. I'm gonna be fully detached and not worry about it. But this play in between is so tough, but I think it's really valuable.
It goes back to that um, Chesterton quote. It's like you have to hate something enough to have something to change, and you have to love it enough to put effort into changing it.
Mhm.
It's like that is you have to be completely dissatisfied and completely hopeful at the same time. It's like it's hard. It sucks because
Yeah.
it's
Gosh.
it's it can I've been brought to tears um in small, like just in little small things. It's like in design, like for a design project, it's like what you're saying when you're designing something is this can be done better. Like I can design a better dustpan than what's been out there already.
Mhm.
um there's a better form of a dustpan, and you also have to say that I'm willing to put in the work to bring it to fruition.
Mhm.
And that is like it takes effort and it takes grind and splinters and sleepless nights and
And it's not like it pops in your head either. It's a process of work, which is also really important.
Exactly. 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 And you get better at it. You get quicker.
Hmm.
Um, like all things, it's something that you can get better at. But yeah. And speaking of bringing that in, I don't know if we've had this conversation yet. I know I've like on camera, but I brought this up a couple times. Um, one of the ways that this humility that I'm very intentional about this humility in my life as a designer and an artist and a maker is to say, um, I don't create things, I make things.
Hmm.
Like I'm of the firm belief that humans are not able to create, but they are able to make things of creation. So God created originally. Everything that was there since he created. But that creativity, as the world calls it today, is actually humans discovering the nature of creation.
Hmm.
It's a new configuration of paint. It's a new mechanical mechanism that still uses everything that was there already. It's a new dustpan, right? It's a new this. It's a new that. Um, but it's not creation because it was already there. But it's partly our. It's also not to be looked down upon though, because it's like um, I also see it as one of our main differences between like animals and humans. That's what makes humans unique as being built in the image of God is our ability to make. It's
Hmm.
like what we can do with God's creation is unlike what any other species has ever done,
Yeah.
right? And so I think that's our like little g God like ability,
Yeah.
so to speak. Um,
Well, and the image I had in my head was, you have the stars, and the humans can't do anything about the stars. But what they can do is connect them in order to make constellations. Like there's that is the creative mapping. Like we're able to take what's already there and um and
and learn about it.
project onto it almost, and say like,
Yes,
okay,
yeah,
I can
yeah.
detect the pattern, and I can make these connections. And so I learn about, on one side, I'm learning about like, oh, when people are interacting these ways, we have a kingdom, and we can like explore these different ways that humans interact with one another. And then there's this figure called a princess, and then I can see this random assortment of stars in the sky, and I see this pattern, and I'm like, oh, that looks like a princess, and you map it onto it, and it's all connection. It's um you know and that's it. Like the neurons are already in your head, but they're linking. They're not. It's all about more integration,
And
which
that's
goes back
something
to
that I would say.
metamodernity.
Oh, oh, full circle. Um, something that I feel like is relevant to bring up now also is like this nature of creation being what it is.
Mm,
Um, I think that one of the common kind of sticking points and muddy holes that um, people inevitably find themselves in when curious about Christianity is Satan and
mm,
what power does Satan have? And I would say it's not too different from that of humans. Uh, Satan cannot create; he can only molest, manipulate, and reconfigure. It's like love and sex. God created that, um, but Satan chose to flip that into rape and abuse. And it's like he didn't create sex, right? But he twisted it. He took something that was there and bent it. Um,
mm.
what's another example? I don't know. That's the one that usually like pops into my head first. Is like
Well, I
this
think I
this
think the
beautiful.
justice instinct, right? There's a certain amount of, you want something that's good. You want this thing to be restored, but it's the manipulation of punishment. and
Yes. Yes.
seeking that as an end
Right.
versus actual restoration and
Totally.
injustice.
Totally.
Uh,
Absolutely.
my friend Neil, this is a great quote from him, and this is purposefully like cut off from everything he says because I think this is perfect. Satan is a tool, is his quote, which I think captures it. It's you know,
That's deeper than it
yeah,
seems at its face. Yeah.
yes. He
Yeah.
says other he says he's a tool for things, and he goes on. I just like Satan is a tool. Like I think that
Satan's a tool.
yeah
Leave it there. Let
yeah.
people struggle with it. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's just that very thing, like if all things are going to work out for this master plan of how everything is going to go, then he's just a piece of this thing, and it'll
Yes.
work out as it goes. So
Yep. Yep. Yep.
yeah, gosh. Well, we're coming across about around 2 hours. So
Yeah.
is there anything you want to share to before we close out? Any closing remarks, and we'll
Oh man. There's always more to talk about, but man, I think 2 hours is good.
yeah.
That'll
I don't
yeah.
want people sitting for another hour as they're watching it. So we can always split it up.
You don't want them to suffer through another hour of this?
People are more likely to see. You keep all the so this is the thing. You keep all the controversial stuff to like the last 30 minutes. Nobody watches it.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
I can see the numbers. I see who watches it. No one hits that point. So you can say
The
whatever you
metrics,
want back there.
the analytics. Yeah.
You can say all of this stuff at the beginning, and then you can say psych halfway through, and then you can just never mind. We weren't talking about that. So
You thought. You thought. That's funny. Yeah. No. 2 hours is good for today, I think.
oh, any closing
This is
thoughts for the listeners?
I don't know. Be good.
Be
Seek
good.
truth.
Yeah.
Seek truth. Wherever that leads, figure it out. Or try to.
Yeah.
It's worth your time. Yeah.
If you're
I'd like to say to you that this was fun and we got to do this again.
yeah, I'm very glad. Yeah, we'll have to do it again.
Yeah.
My advice for the viewer is if money is your goal, maybe shoot a little higher, and whatever you're shooting
Yeah.
for, shoot a little higher than that. Like if you're shooting for I don't know, for money, maybe shoot for family. If you're shooting for happiness, maybe shoot for meaning. Just go a little bit further, and that's
Zoom
just
out a
never
little bit.
yeah,
Widen,
just
widen your gaze.
because no matter where you're going to be going, even if you're saying you're shooting for God, you're not actually going to be hitting where you need to. So you just need to kind of get a little higher. And so that's my advice. But I'll stop our recording here. Bye everybody.
Here.